Nō mai, haere mai, welcome. I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. This weekend's planned march across Auckland Harbour Bridge by tens of thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters has been given extra impetus by Israel's attack on Hamas leaders in Qatar this week. Welcome, Robert.
Morning, Bruce.
From the United States and the United Kingdom to Russia and China, the world's leaders have been quick to condemn this Israeli strike in Qatar's capital, Doha. But less has been said about why it happened. What do you think lay behind the decision to attack?
Well, first of all, let's just establish this was a flagrant breach of international law. An attack, a preemptive attack on a sovereign state, Qatar, which has been involved at the request of the United States and Israel on mediation efforts between Hamas and the Israeli government. There's two, I think, clear motivations that seem to come through. And that firstly is that this attack kills any immediate prospect of the ceasefire negotiations continuing. And that leads to a second possible motivation for Mr. Netanyahu. Mr. Netanyahu has been under quite considerable domestic pressure. This pressure, of course, is being driven to some extent by the families of hostages. There are still, we estimate there's 50 Israeli hostages still being detained by Hamas, and about 20 of those are still alive. While those ceasefire talks are still hanging, the pressure mounts on Netanyahu. If that prospect is snuffed out, at least in the short term, it begins to diminish some of the pressures that Mr. Netanyahu may feel. In short, Mr. Netanyahu, who is, I think, committed to his own political survival, may have had a political motivation for ending those ceasefire talks. And as a war leader, he probably has far more room for manoeuvre than he does as someone who is trying to navigate a ceasefire deal with Hamas.
So where now to for the war in Gaza?
Well, that's a very good question. My crystal ball is no better than anyone else's, but what can we look at the situation in Gaza at the moment? Israel is in the process of taking over Gaza City, where 1 million Palestinians live. And they've taken 40% of it, and it has resulted almost nightly in large numbers of Palestinians being killed. To date, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, more than 64,000 Palestinians have been killed. That's for the entire period of the conflict since the 7th of October 2023. So in a city of 1 million people, Israel, of course, has urged many of the occupants to flee, to go evacuate to the south. Many of them are refusing to move. Some of them are refusing to move simply because they have no means to travel. They have no money. And secondly, many of them fear that moving south will be prelude to being ejected from Gaza. And I think the feeling is that many of them are defiant, and they feel they've had everything done to them. Many Palestinians have lost children, family members, etc. And if Netanyahu wants them to leave, well, I think their response is we're going to dig in. So, you know, in the short term, we're watching a very grim end game play out. There's no doubt about it, Bruce. Netanyahu, and these are his words, not mine, wants to take control of Gaza, full control, and his government wants to annex the West Bank this year. And, you know, there's a lot of attention on Gaza, but they are expanding illegal settlements in West Bank daily. And then when we talk about settlements, that means people being ejected from their homes, and they're, in many cases, facing violence from settlers. That violence is protected by the presence of the Israeli Defense Force. So Netanyahu believes that his agenda is to take over Gaza and the West Bank this year, and ceasefire may be seen as an impediment. Well, he's got the ceasefire out of the way for the moment. The bad news for Netanyahu you asked me what happens next, is that there's been a UN Security Council meeting, and the 15 members of the UN Security Council unanimously condemned Israel's attack in Doha against the Hamas leadership. So we may be seeing a bit of a distancing going on now between the United States and Israel. How significant is that? It remains to be seen. But I don't think Netanyahu, there's two things that could really slow Netanyahu's agenda for the West Bank and Gaza. One is the United States, which is a crucial player, deciding it doesn't like the direction that this is going. That is possible with a mercurial leader like Trump. But more importantly, secondly, I think the Arab countries, for the first time during this crisis, have decided they've had enough. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, which is an important player, have said that Israel's attack on Qatar was totally unacceptable. And, so what we may have here is middle powers within the Arab world who've been, let's be quite frank, be frank about it, they've offered ritual denunciations of Israel's unrelenting military onslaught against the Palestinians, but have done nothing about it. A third factor, so I think two factors. Firstly, the United States could be reassessing its position in relation to Netanyahu. Secondly, there may be evidence that some key Arab states, many of whom are partners of the United States, are making it quite clear now to Washington that they're drawing a line in the sand. This has got to stop, and that the attack on Qatar was the final straw as far as they're concerned. A third factor is that a flotilla of about 50 boats, ships I should say, is it scheduled to reach Gaza, the coastline of Gaza, between the 14th or the 15th of September. It's already been attacked twice, once in Tunisia, I think both in Tunisia actually. And so that is going to put pressure, psychologically and political pressure, on the Israeli government. Are they going to do what they've always done before, intercept aid ships coming in to the coastline of Gaza in international waters, given the fact that Israel has violated the sovereignty of 6 countries in the last 72 hours? It's not just been Qatar that's been attacked. They've launched attacks elsewhere.
Can I jump in there and ask, because you've talked about these illegal attacks, attacks on sovereignty, and that's exactly what it seems. From Ukraine to Greenland to Qatar, there seems to be an increasing attack on state sovereignty in words and actions.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, what is going on is that the most powerful country in the world, in the United States, is now under a leadership, Mr. Trump, who is not paying lip service. In the past, we've seen American presidents act in a way which was at odds with the international law and the rules-based international order. But many of them always mentioned that, for example, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which was clearly at odds with a rules-based international order, it was justified in exceptional circumstances. In the aftermath of 9/11, the perception that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, was about to use them against the US. We know all that was nonsense and was untrue and inaccurate, but it was a rationale. We saw other presidents, such as President Obama and President Biden, also praise multilateral institutions and the rules-based order. Again, they didn't hesitate. Mr. Trump and Mr. Obama used drones quite illegally in a number of countries against perceived terrorist targets. And Mr. Biden, as we've seen, didn't let humanitarian law stand in his way in giving Israel unqualified support in its retaliation against the Hamas terror attack on the 7th of October. But what is different about this administration is it doesn't pay lip service to international rules-based order. It has barely veiled contempt for multilateralism and international institutions. So we now have a revisionist administration in Washington, doesn't share the values of many countries, other liberal democracies, such as New Zealand. And basically, you ask me what's happening, there is a recognition amongst countries such as Netanyahu that they can push their luck with Mr. Trump in office. Mr.
Right.
Trump is not going to rebuke them for breaking international law. After all, he recently broke international law, his administration, when they took out 11 suspected drug dealers. They weren't arrested, they just blew them out of the water. So this is a guy who's made illegal territorial threats against Canada. This is a president that makes no secret that he wants to take Greenland from Denmark. So, in a sense, this has created a climate in which further erosions of international law are occurring. I don't think Mr. Netanyahu would be so cavalier about violating the sovereignty of other countries if he didn't think Mr. Trump had his back.
Right. And New Zealand, a small trading nation,
Yeah.
we have strong reasons to want
Sure.
an international rules-based order, including human rights and state sovereignty, to be upheld. Will this weekend's Auckland Harbour Bridge March have any impact on the stand that our government takes on these issues?
Again, difficult to predict, but our government may be reassessing its position towards the Trump administration. It's been incredibly reticent on what's been happening in the Middle East. It's been quite tongue-tied at times. This march is an indication that at least elements of domestic opinion in New Zealand feel that the government has to do more to bring its foreign policy into line with our domestic values. And in a sense, the timing of this meeting, this protest, is quite important because it's quite clear that the New Zealand government's approach of softly has not worked particularly well for protecting our national interests. It has not stopped a 15% tariff being slapped on New Zealand, despite keeping quiet about Mr. Trump's plans for owning Gaza and things like that. When people in this country, many of them expected them. This is not a political point. You could be a national supporter, you could be a Labour supporter, you could be an ACT supporter. You might expect the Trump administration to be far more resilient in opposing, for example, the breaches of international law that's going on and in the Middle East, and also Mr. Trump's inability to stand up to what Putin is doing in Ukraine. So, in a sense, the reason I mention this is that there may be elements within the New Zealand government, particularly in the National Party, who feel they've been treated very badly by the Trump administration for, if you like, a softly approach when Mr. Trump was taking steps to undermine the national interests of this country. So how long is this country going to tolerate that? Let's be quite clear. What's happening in the Middle East has direct ramifications for New Zealand. We depend on rules and procedures internationally, both for trade reasons and also for security reasons. So the trashing of international law in the Middle East, it may be geographically far away, but it has direct reverberations for our ability to operate as a relatively small country in the international arena.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Te pono me te araha.